Kalorama, a recorded books/hybrid imprint, presents The Petroleum Papers. Inside the far-right conspiracy to cover up climate change. By Geoff Dembicki. Read by Steve Menasche. Introduction. Midway through a historic congressional hearing about whether some of the world's largest oil companies lied to the public about climate change, I noticed something odd. It was October 28th, 2021, and I was watching the event through a live stream on my laptop in a small Brooklyn apartment. The House Committee on Oversight and Reform had that day hauled in the heads of Exxon, BP, Shell, Chevron, and the American Petroleum Institute for questioning. Democrats wanted answers about a multi-decade campaign led by the oil and gas industry to convince millions of people that the climate emergency doesn't exist, and that even if it does, there is no point in fighting it. But Republicans had called in their own witness to testify. A welding foreman from Fouke, Arkansas. Neil Crabtree was there to say he'd lost his job on a canceled pipeline that would have stretched from the Canadian province of Alberta to the Texas Gulf Coast. What did that have to do with a hearing in Washington, D.C. about big oil disinformation? Like the dozens of other climate journalists covering this event, I felt pressure to get the facts right. At the same moment that oil executives were being grilled, the Joe Biden administration was trying to pass a multi-trillion-dollar spending package through Congress that contained tax credits supporting clean energy and electric vehicles, penalties for harmful methane emissions, and a policy pushing electric utilities to phase out natural gas and coal. If this Build Back Better Act became law, it would be the most substantial action ever taken by the United States on climate change. I knew from reporting about climate change for more than a dozen years that during moments of great possibility, the roar of disinformation is at its loudest. This book will chart many such high-stake moments, and now another one had certainly arrived. This is our last best chance to pass meaningful climate legislation. Danielle Deiseroth, senior climate analyst at the progressive polling organization Data for Progress, told me of the Biden agenda. If we delay action any longer, we're going to be really screwed. Finally, at least, oil executives are being called out for their tactics by America's top lawmakers. Today, the CEOs of the largest oil companies in the world have a choice. You can either come clean and stop supporting climate disinformation, or you can sit there in front of the American public and lie under oath, said Democratic Representative Ro Khanna. The CEOs answered impassively. I don't believe companies should lie, and I would tell you that we don't do that, Exxon's Darren Woods said in response to Khanna. Amid the rich, polished executives, Crabtree couldn't help but stand out. The pipeline worker from Arkansas wore a suit and tie awkwardly. His voice wavered as he explained that he had been hired to help build the Keystone XL pipeline, a project designed to bring 830,000 barrels of oil per day from Canada into the United States. Because this oil would have been derived from an especially polluting petroleum deposit called the Canadian oil sands, which are sometimes referred to as tar sands, Keystone had been the target of years of environmental protests. Biden canceled the project on his first day in office. I lost my job, Crabtree said. There seems to be no thought given to the hundreds of thousands of workers in this industry or the millions of products that we use every single day that are provided by fossil fuels. Crabtree presented a sympathetic figure, an honest and hard-working American seemingly chewed up by the political machinations of Washington. But I sensed there was more to his story. With the hearing on in the background, I searched Crabtree's name. One of the first results was the website for a group called Americans for Tax Reform. On the site, there was a self-recorded video of Crabtree inside a vehicle. Instead of a suit, he was dressed in a hoodie and baseball cap. Canceling this Keystone Pipeline to make a group of people happy has had real-life consequences, he said. We got people who can't work now, can't provide for their families. I saw that underneath the video there was a special request that people send more such videos. Americans for Tax Reform is collecting personal testimonials of Americans hit by President Biden's policies. Crabtree's appearance at the hearing was starting to make more sense. That's because Americans for Tax Reform isn't just some ordinary conservative group. It was one of the authors of the Climate Change Denial Playbook. The organization helped create an action plan in 1998 along with Exxon, BP, Shell, Chevron, the American Petroleum Institute, and others to flood mainstream media with disinformation about the scientific consensus on global warming. A leaked document lays out the strategy in detail. Develop and implement a national media relations program to inform the media about uncertainties in climate science, to generate national, regional, and local media coverage on the scientific uncertainties, and thereby educate and inform the public, stimulating them to raise questions with policymakers. Not much had changed in the nearly 25 years since then. Not long after Joe Biden was elected on a platform to invest trillions in green industries, create millions of new jobs, and drastically lower U.S. emissions, the head of Americans for Tax Reform, a well-known Republican operative named Grover Norquist, co-authored an op-ed in the Washington Examiner declaring war on the extreme left's big government climate agenda. Crabtree's testimonial was part of a carefully coordinated media campaign that Norquist dubbed #Biden Killed My Job. Several months later, Crabtree was broadcasting live as a witness at the House congressional hearing on climate disinformation. After he was done, as CEOs like Exxon's Woods were asked to account for spreading scientific denial, Republicans steered the conversation back to Crabtree. It's critical that this committee examine the pressing concerns of American citizens, said James Comer, a Republican congressmember from Kentucky who once said, "I do not believe in global warming." Crabtree's remarks were carried by mainstream outlets like the New York Times, CNN, The Guardian, Reuters, the BBC, and the Daily Mail, but none highlighted his ties to the machinery of big oil's climate crisis denial. There is no reason to suspect that Crabtree was lying about losing work on Keystone XL, and he might not have even been aware of Americans for Tax Reform's history of denying climate change. But the media attention his testimony received was a victory for Republicans, the oil and gas CEOs testifying under oath, and the Canadian oil sands industry. Once again, these forces were intentionally distracting the public from the bigger picture, that the stable climate upon which all human life depends is being altered beyond recognition. It was disheartening to see this playbook still being used decades after its creation, because my research had educated me to how, time and again, such tactics laid waste to humanity's easiest, best chances to fend off climate catastrophe. Now I could see nothing but lost years, a window of opportunity spanning more than half a century, repeatedly and forcefully shut by powerful interests who've known and suppressed the truth. Many people take as a given the perilous point at which our planet has arrived. They struggle to imagine a world in which fossil fuels aren't driving us toward the precipice. But my reporting has made me realize there was nothing inevitable about the chaotic future we face, with all of the natural systems that support us collapsing. It did not have to come to this. We are here because at each critical juncture, fossil fuel companies, dependent on a particularly dirty form of oil, worked in concert with political allies in the United States and Canada to build an edifice of lies that has prevented our self-rescue. I know this, and will show it in this book, because virtually all the evidence is publicly available. But the details have been scattered haphazardly across the Internet, or else contained in vast digital archives, hosted by watchdog groups such as the Climate Investigation Center, DSMOG, the Center for International Environmental Law, Koch docs, and others, that most people don't have the time or know-how to peruse. Several years ago, I decided to dive into this ocean of information head first. Since then, I've navigated hundreds of documents, first-hand accounts, news pieces, and studies. I've done in-depth interviews with key players, those that helped build the disinformation machine, those who've made it their life's work to understand it, and those now trying to tear it down. And through it all, I have had to fight my own rising waves of anger at what I was discovering and piecing together. These Petroleum papers weave together a wide cast of fascinating characters. They tell of Robert Dunlop, a U.S. oil executive who disregarded a dire warning about climate change in 1959 from the inventor of the atomic bomb and instead tapped a massive new source of oil in Canada. They reveal how Exxon, Koch Industries, Shell, and others rushed to exploit the oil sands, even as they privately learned it would crank up the climate's heat and cause catastrophic death and destruction. They show these companies quietly anticipated public outcry about climate change and prepared a strategy to neutralize it, so that when NASA scientist James Hansen brought the emergency to the public's attention in 1988, the oil industry was able to quickly sow doubt via media campaigns. Contained in the papers are figures everyone will know: Rupert Murdoch, Donald Trump, and some names immediately recognized only on one side of the border. Canada's former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, for example, a one-time employee of an oil company owned by Exxon. This saga of power and wealth, pursued at the expense of a survivable planet, includes beltway lobbyists, astroturf organizers, and politicians for whom oil was literally a religion. This story includes as well people fighting back. A famous class action lawyer who helped convict the tobacco industry for lying about cancer and is now using the courts to reveal big oil's lies. And a formerly trusted Exxon employee who was pushed out of the company for asking too many hard questions about the company's climate change denial. My journey took me from Seattle to Washington, D.C. to the oil sands themselves. It also took me to the Philippines, where I met a young woman who knows all too excruciatingly well where our world has arrived after so many destroyed opportunities. I'll start the story with her. Chapter 1. The First Warnings, 1959 through 2013. Just another storm. Joanna Sustento woke up that morning with a feeling of pleasant expectation. She was a Filipina in her early 20s, getting started in a career in business, and living with her family in Tacloban City, a coastal city on the central Philippines island of Leyte. Sustento shared the small space with her dad, a lawyer, her mom, the manager of a government bank, her 2 older brothers, her sister-in-law, and her nephew, a 3-year-old named Taryn. Apart from Taryn, Sustento was the youngest person there. The only girl in the family, she said. So, being the only girl, my parents, especially my dad, would often call me Princess. I didn't really like it when he called me that. The house was crowded, yet infused with warmth. It is a culture where family is considered the foundation of all social life. Sustento held many happy memories of large get-togethers of extended relatives. That past week, in fact, had been a blur of communion. After many years away, several relatives on her father's side had decided to visit Tacloban, resulting in a packed schedule of family gatherings and just hanging out and going to family lunches and dinners. No one had been paying too much attention to the warnings on the news that a tropical storm, known in the South Pacific as a typhoon, was headed toward the city. This on its own wasn't necessarily alarming news for Tacloban's inhabitants. We experience an average of 20 typhoons a year, Sustento said. They're just normal for us. Tacloban's 240,000 or so residents occupy a narrow stretch of land bordered to the east by San Pablo Bay and to the west by Mount Naga Naga. According to its official slogan, Tacloban is a city of progress, beauty, and love. It is also a city of low incomes, even by Filipino standards. Over 40% of people in the region of eastern Visayas, where Tacloban is located, lived below the poverty line in 2012. Many of them resided in small homes built out of concrete and corrugated steel located on or close to the coastline. The vast majority of homes and buildings were less than 16 feet above sea level, and with no coastal defenses, they were highly exposed to storms and floods. The news reports that week stressed that this approaching storm was much stronger and potentially more dangerous than usual. But hearing about above-average wind and rain intensity felt like an abstract and distant threat. You couldn't really wrap your head around it, Sustento said. The night before the storm was supposed to hit, her family was over for dinner at her grandmother's house. When we were about to go home, I had this uncle from a different city talking to my dad, suggesting for us not to go home and to wait the storm out until it's over, she said. But of course, my dad insisted on going home. Having experienced so many typhoons in the past, they figured our neighborhood would be safe, our house would withstand the storm. Sustento was even a bit excited. Since she was a little girl, she'd loved typhoons. A tropical storm hitting Tacloban meant that the city's busy street life, its downtown crowds shopping for iPhones and vegetables, people eating cheeseburgers at Jollibee's, roadside vendors barbecuing pork skewers, drivers of brightly colored jeepneys whisking people north and south, came to a halt. It would mean that classes would be suspended for days. There would be no work, she said. So I would just be at home with my family making the most of the cozy, chilly weather. Occasionally, a storm would knock out power lines. There would be blackouts, we'd be out of power for days, she said, but that just added to the experience. Now, early in the morning of November 8th, 2013, Sustento was roused out of her sleepy reverie by rain coming in through her open bedroom window. She got up and tried to close it. But I had a hard time because the wind was so strong. Her father was outside, and Sustento went out to join him, looking toward the horizon. Everything was so white, she said. It was very hazy. Back indoors, the family prepared breakfast. My dad told me to make some coffee. Meanwhile, the 3-year-old Taryn ran around the house. I could see the joy in his eyes, probably because we were all together. But as the wind picked up, Sustento started to feel a little bit nervous. The whole house felt like it was vibrating. Then I hear this very eerie sound. The wind was howling. It was as if a monster were coming out from the skies. Sustento opened a screen door to peer outside, and the intensity was so strong my lips were being blown away as I was speaking. She ducked back inside, looked up, and noticed water dripping from the ceiling. Sustento went to get a basin, but along the way she saw that water was coming in through the kitchen door. Thinking it was rainwater, I covered the doors with the rugs, she said. Then I saw that water was also coming inside from our main door, so again we tried to cover that with the rugs, thinking it would absorb it. But it was already starting to flood. Looking at the clock, she saw that it was nearly 7 a.m. Sustento kept glancing at her parents. She was looking for clues from their facial expressions, something to tell her if she should be scared or if everything is still okay or normal. But by that point, the typical laughter and morning chatter had stopped. It was unusual for them to stay silent. The typhoon had begun 5 days earlier as a low-pressure system, hundreds of miles southeast of Tacloban. As it gathered force, the Japan Meteorological Agency upgraded it to a tropical depression, and weather authorities issued a storm warning for the South Pacific island nations in its path. Not long after that, the storm received official typhoon designation and a name: Haiyan. On November 6th, Typhoon Haiyan slammed into Palau and Micronesia with 150-mile-per-hour winds, destroying homes and knocking out power and water supplies. Helicopter pilots saw trees and buildings scattered like twigs across the landscape. Picking up energy and intensity, Haiyan headed toward the Philippines, where local authorities assigned it the name Yolanda. It's common in this part of the world for typhoons to receive both an international name and a local one. By this point, Haiyan had become the most powerful storm recorded the entire year. Let us do all we can while the typhoon has not yet hit land, then Philippines President Benigno Aquino said in a speech broadcast on national TV the day before the advancing threat made landfall. Let us remain calm, especially in buying our primary needs and in moving to safer places. National experts were getting nervous, however. This is a very dangerous typhoon, state weather forecaster Glaza Escular said. There are not too many mountains in its path to deflect the force of impact, making it more dangerous. Some of the danger could also be attributed to climate change. That year, 2013, was the fourth warmest year since records started in 1880, with the planet's combined land and ocean surface temperature 0.62 degrees Celsius higher than the average of 13.9 degrees (57 degrees Fahrenheit) recorded during the 20th century. This was due largely to global emissions of carbon dioxide, many of them caused by the burning of coal, oil, and gas. Those emissions rose to 35.8 billion tons in 2013, a 60% increase when compared to the year 2000. The Philippines has always been highly exposed to typhoons because it's surrounded by water warmed by the equatorial sun. This water releases some of the heat into the atmosphere, which then creates wind and rain clouds. However, as the ocean's surface temperature increases over time from the effects of climate change, more and more heat is released into the atmosphere. The Climate Reality Project, a nonprofit organization founded by Al Gore, explained. This additional heat in the ocean and air can lead to stronger and more frequent storms, which is exactly what we've seen in the Philippines over the last decade. On the evening before Haiyan hit Sustaneto's home, the typhoon was comparable in area to the entire landmass of the Philippines. Depicted in real time on meteorological maps, it resembled a massive buzzsaw slicing toward Tacloban, and with sustained winds of almost 200 miles per hour, it was equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane, the same designation given to Hurricane Andrew, which in 1992 caused 65 deaths and $27.3 billion in damage when it tore through the Bahamas, Florida, and Louisiana. CNN reported live on the approaching typhoon. This is probably one of the top dozen of all storms ever seen on this planet, the network's chief meteorologist, Chad Myers, said on air. Chad, said CNN anchor Suzanne Malveaux during the broadcast, is there anything, in light of the fact that we've got this warning, we know it's coming, is there anything people can do there? Because I imagine the damage could be extraordinary if people don't pay attention, or at least don't prepare for what's going to hit them. We will lose people, no matter what you can do, Myers replied. This is almost, at some point for some people on these islands, an unsurvivable storm. But the deadly chaos barreling toward Sustento and her family wasn't just the result of chance and bad luck. Unbelievable as it might seem, the events that led to the most powerful storm in history were set in motion more than 50 years earlier. Men on a Hunt. On a November day in 1959, one of the most powerful people in oil and gas received a credible warning that his industry could cause death and suffering for large numbers of the planet's inhabitants. The warning came during an event in New York City called Energy and Man, a day-long symposium that was attended by government officials, historians, economists, scientists, and fossil fuel industry executives, more than 300 in total. Organized by the American Petroleum Institute, along with Columbia University's Graduate School of Business, the event was described as an inquiry into the role of energy, past, present, and future, in the lives of each of us. It was also a celebration of the industry's 100th year of existence. Robert Dunlop was among the attendees that day who walked up the stone steps of Columbia's Low Library, passed by Ionian columns and bronze busts of Zeus and Apollo, entered a foyer containing a white marble statue of Athena, and entered a library reading room lined with green marble columns topped with gold. Dunlop presented himself as the successful 50-year-old businessperson that he was. Black tie, horn-rimmed glasses, not a trace of stubble, and hair slicked back and meticulously parted to the side. He was the second speaker at this gathering of post-war power brokers, and he opened his 35-minute speech with a not-so-subtle metaphor. It pleases me to note that on its 100th birthday, the petroleum industry is not a tired old industry. The petroleum revolution.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?